midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I'm the Partnerships and Community Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I'm very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Pat Schneider. He is the Chief People Officer at Chevron Spectrum Federal Credit Union. Pat, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for folks who are listening, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yes, absolutely. And first, thank you so much for the opportunity to share my experiences with your viewers. And I look forward to our conversation. So Pat Schneider, he, him, his. I currently have the privilege of being the Chief People Officer at Chevron Spectrum Federal Credit Union. And it's funny when you say when you were younger, because that seems like so long ago. I really had to reflect on that. And there was some key learnings, right? I always enjoyed taking things apart, putting them back together, and I got a lot of energy from being around and playing with people and spending time with them. And I wasn't sure how those things really fit together until later on in my career, when I started, going to school and learning about psychology and how systems and processes can really help people through skill building and practice, and ultimately how those same systems and processes can help people and organizations really fit together. So I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. It wasn't until college that I figured out that my skills have meaning someplace. So.
Absolutely. Hindsight is always 2020, and definitely in terms of building things and putting things together over these past 2 years, especially in people, there's been a huge opportunity to redesign and really think about
Totally.
systems. Fast forward to today, how do you think your personal journey has really led you to be Chief People Officer, specifically at Chevron Spectrum Federal Credit Union?
Yeah. I think I, like everybody, has a very unique perspective on that. And, as I was reflecting back, I really firmly believe in my core that people genuinely want to do a good job,
Mhm.
to enjoy what they're doing, and to feel valued by the company that they work for. And I saw growing up what happens when only one or two of those things are present. If you don't have all three, people are just going to a job, right? Or they just have a hobby. They're not truly all present and not truly all there. So in college, I then learned that there's a little bit of a science to this, in addition to an art to pair people and roles up and selecting the right people for the right roles. So I had that in the back of my head, and as I started working in the real world, I came across HR departments or HR professionals that drove an organizational only agenda, and they really missed the needs of the people that they served, and it was fundamentally not rewarding. So on my journey over the past 3 decades, I've really been stealing things from really smart people, not trinkets or items, but thoughts and ideas and strategies. And I believe there's something from everybody that I can grow from. So I took that. I welcomed and cherished the opportunity to get feedback, evolved my processes and my techniques that put people in the roles that they are good at and that they're passionate about, and helped ensure that the company only has roles that's valuable to them. And when we get those three things put together, um, beautiful things happen. So that's really kind of been my journey of self-discovery, and it continues even to this day.
Absolutely. I think those three things are really important. And at the end of the day, team members, employees really want to feel valued, feel like their work has meaning behind it. And for folks who are kind of listening to this as a podcast as well, I need to comment on your background, which has inspire, motivate, improve, be positive, focus, and be creative, which are other ingredients to a really successful kind of workplace and environment where people can put forth their best ideas. I want to ask, from your role as Chief People Officer, what are kind of qualitative and quantitative ways you really measure this company culture that everybody participates in?
Yeah. Well, to be honest with you, this is an area that and we are still getting our arms around. We did just add a people data analytics function to help us start thinking about this. So I have hope for the future. And there are some lagging indicators that everybody uses around employee attrition and employee engagement. But for us, we really built our culture on a very deliberate structure. We didn't leave it to chance. We brought in some really smart consultants, and they help us rethink how to rebuild that structure for our culture. And within that structure, there are some very specific behaviors that we look for. And when we see those behaviors, we feel really good. When we see people communicating in a way that tears down silos, they don't say they say we, things like that. When they synthesize concepts that tie back to our overall strategy and break out of that silo, we feel really good about that. And when we ensure that all the voices are heard and are proactively soliciting a variety of views, we get really excited about that. And frankly, when we don't, that's when we get concerned. So we've increased our feedback. We've increased our conversations. We look for these behaviors, and that's what we're really coached to on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. And we let people self-assess themselves against that culture too, to really help them come to their own conclusions on how they're doing. So again, we're still working on this, but we track down behaviors and we provide feedback on them.
I think that's a good example too of just language you use in meetings, whether you're talking about they or talking about we as a collective, and
Totally.
that feedback mechanism too, and how like since people are very complicated, they're all different parts of their journey, career wise, life wise, it all coming together. I'm sure you mentioned feedback too. People have lots of feedback, whether it's positive, negative, anything in between too.
Yep, absolutely.
I would love to ask, from your perspective as well, how you see employee feedback management as a really kind of important tool and strategy to build a culture of listening, and how that manifests at your organization overall.
Yeah, so wildly important, right? And outside of work, we get feedback often and constantly. And I'm always so curious why this doesn't happen at work, right? My kids are in finals right now, and
Yeah.
they go to school, they take their final, and before they even get home, they get a grade, right? They get a score. And at home, if you say something to offend a significant other, they give you feedback like right away, right?
Right
If you
away.
play a game right away, right? If you play a game, you win, you lose. If you speed, you get a ticket. If you exercise, you feel good. So why don't companies do this? Why do they wait till the end of the year to give feedback? It's the most crazy thing I've run across in corporate America. And to answer your question, we operate in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world right now. And feedback is the only way we can help ensure that people are navigating that complexity and that uncertainty. Otherwise, they drift off in the wrong direction, and you attempt to pull them back once a year, and that just doesn't really work. And if at a company or if you as a leader want to truly accomplish a goal, especially a new goal, you have to increase the cadence of feedback. You have to be honest about the feedback, and you have to be deliberate. You have to, more honesty, more specific, and more often. Like I often when I'm working with my managers about feedback, I use the example of a teacher, right? And teachers show up every day, and they work really hard, and they're often underappreciated and underpaid, and we ask a lot of them, right? But do you think a teacher would ever say, "Hey, you're doing a good job. Just keep doing what you're doing"? They wouldn't. They would never mislead an individual and just cloud over their feedback, right? They get down to the nitty gritty and say, "You're doing this well, but you could do this better," right? Where managers are just more comfortable going, "Yeah, you did good, did a good job," right? And I think that comes from a place of fear. And the one way to erode that fear is to develop that foundation of trust. Like, I can speak honestly, and my team, my employee will appreciate that. And when that happens, they can start having some really good feedback conversations, and then everybody benefits. So that's the foundation, is trust.
Absolutely. Trust is so important, your relationship with that individual, and constructive feedback and feedback that's helpful above good job or you're doing well, getting specific really helps the individual and helps the company and your relationship as well. So I definitely agree with you there too. Whether it's,
Totally.
if someone has come directly to you, Pat, or if someone has just given this feedback overall. Can you share any kind of example of how employee feedback has inspired a change in a policy, strategy, or initiative at Chevron Spectrum Federal Credit Union over the past, couple of years?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm thinking through a couple different examples because this this tends to happen a lot, um, especially from our member facing. We're a credit union, so the sole reason we exist is to take care of our members, and so our people that work with our members get feedback a lot. So a lot of our recommendations come from there. And just today, actually, our mailroom came to us and escalated the concern that they had with some of the patterns and trends that they recognized with some the mail that was being returned to us. So it happens a lot, but one of the big ones came out of a recent engagement survey. And as we dug into the data, it became apparent that our people were concerned with the relationships that they had with their supervisor. And it's no surprise, half of them are working from home and they don't see each other, right? But for a variety of reasons, they felt those relationships were not as strong as they'd like them to be. So we put together a cross-functional team to dig deeper in this. And as we dug, we found that um, um, that a lot of this have to do with back to that feedback model that we were using. We traditionally had the big monolithic once a year performance evaluation. And leading up to that, employees were, they worked hard, right? So they're writing and writing and writing and trying to defend their rating. And then the managers would get that. And then the managers were like, oh, they're not that, they're this. And then they were writing and writing and writing. And then they had to go to their boss and they had to defend. It was just this whole political tsunami of words, right? And hours were spent on this thing. Um, and then at the end of the day, after the feedback was given, the employee only remembered the rating. They didn't remember any of the feedback, those hours of words,
Yeah.
right? So this relationship was eroding in this unnecessary tsunami of literature. Um, so we put together this cross-functional team. They went to their departments, gathered feedback, brought it back, and we tipped the whole thing upside down. So again, getting back to that feedback conversation, we do check-ins on an iterative basis, at least quarterly, preferably monthly. We keep it down to 2 or 3 things that are really important. We eliminated performance ratings. So now when a manager talks to their employee, they're having an authentic conversation. They're
Mhm.
not getting hung up on, am I a good, am I a missed opportunity? None of that language fits into that conversation. So they leave feeling as though they've got some good feedback that will help them understand how to do better. And if you remember at the beginning of this conversation, right, people want to literally do a good job, right, to feel valued and to be good at what they're doing, to be passionate about it. So, based on the feedback that we got, we were able to, strengthen those relationships and have more authentic conversations. So
I think that
that's
relationship
that's
is
just that's just one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Go
think
ahead.
that relationship and that example is really important, especially with new folks who are joining, if they're remote and they want to kind of build that trust with their kind of manager as well. And that's a really good and specific example of how you got that feedback and you were able to take action and really showcase that you were actively listening to folks as well and kind of readjust too. I think one of the other pieces to that as well is having a growth mindset as a people leader, and also as a manager as well, and not kind of fixed, especially since we were just talking about how everything is so volatile and we don't have a crystal ball into what the next few years are going to look like as well. Along similar
Totally.
lines, can you share an example of how you and your team have been innovative in a process or strategy recently? And this can relate to any of the many projects that you work on in terms of talent attraction, management, diversity, equity, inclusion, or even benefits and compensation.
Yeah, here's one that we just talked about this morning. We did an annual celebration, and our talent acquisition team really rose to the front of that conversation. increased the number of positions that we filled 100%. We reduced the amount of time that it took to fill them by 92%, and we did it at 70% less cost. And
Wow.
the way we did it, well, let me start with the way most companies and the way we had previously done it is, right, our recruiters would get a requisition from a manager, and they would sit down and talk about it, and then we would post it to our typical sites, and then some people out there would be like, oh, look at this position, let me apply for it, and then we would interview them, and that process is dead. That process is gone. Post and pray is really old, and we try to increase the amount of humanity in the process and establish relationships with these individuals. Number one, by manifesting a network with our managers. HR kind of takes a little bit of a backseat, and I think that's the way it should be. We put our managers out front. We use their personalities. We use their networks because they know the candidates better than we would, right? So we spend time reaching out when we don't have openings, right? When we don't have a need, so that when one does pop up, we already know who's out there. We already know them. They already know us. The entire process goes far quicker. The likelihood of success is far greater, but it's all proactive. It's not reactive, and that that may sound really simple, but when you're used to doing it the same way for years and decades, it takes a lot to say, I need you to jump in on LinkedIn and go give some people some thumbs up. I
Yeah.
need you to be networking with people that you're never going to see, but
Mhm.
maybe good candidates for us, right? That's how we've changed our talent acquisition process. And it's really exciting to see some of the results pouring in this year. So,
I think that's really exciting also in terms of kind of time to hire and also getting to know kind of candidates before those roles are open to, because it goes back to that relationship building too, and understanding kind of what people are looking for also in today's talent market as well. I know some folks are referring to it as the great reshuffle, the great formation, the great resignation, and just kind of a point of reflection too of making sure you're looking at organizations who where you can do your best work, where you feel valued, and where you can find a great manager too. Knowing again that we don't know what this next year will bring, but when you're looking at 2022 and you're thinking about retention and talent management, what are some key elements that are top of mind for success?
so thanks for talking about the bringing up the great recession or great resignation, the great reshuffle. Um, Statistically, the great resignation has been occurring since 2008, and we're really just seeing it continue on a trend that's always been there. Um, and frankly, I see it as the great opportunity, right? And the way we're taking advantage of the great opportunity is we're doubling down on a sense of purpose and focusing on our relationships. And we kind of already talked about how we're getting things out of the way that get in the way of those relationships with the trust and the feedback and that. But we're also on the other side of that same coin is doubling down on us as an organization having a sense of purpose. And again, the number one reason that we're here is to invest in our members and making sure that they're taken care of from a financial perspective, and our people are really, really good at that. But it's also having a sense of purpose within our community at the same time too. And that's something that gets our people super excited. Um, we partner with organizations that give back. We look for opportunities to upgrade our D&I capabilities. We talk about development with every single employee. We're reimagining or rebuilding our headquarters to focus on collaboration, creating, and celebrating. And we have we've deployed targeted employee engagement techniques to various areas that, and instead of a one size fits all, we're far more targeted. So again, I recognize that not all industries are built alike, but we stand poised and ready to capitalize on this great opportunity that's in front of us. And knock on wood, so far it seems to be working well.
Absolutely. I like the reframe around the great opportunity. And also I think that especially throughout these conversations, a lot of people are moving away from a strategy of one size fits all or a cookie cutter approach and having those individual conversations. Again, engaging folks and meeting them where they are is so important. You mentioned kind of the conversation around development with each employee, and we know that there's a ton of research around people are looking to grow in their roles as well. In terms of continuous learning, what tools do you provide to ensure that folks at the organization feel like they are continuously learning at Chevron Spectrum Federal Credit Union?
Um, so when it comes to tools, what we're primarily interested in is tools, and there's a couple of them out there, but tools that help us decentralize learning. When we take the typical construct of a learning and development or training and development program, we're looking for tools like GetAbstract, Degreed, and LinkedIn Learning that provide a framework for people to chase their passion, right? So if we paint the North Star, right, and we ensure or help people understand the direction the organization is going, and then provide them with feedback on the one or two things that they need to align with that direction, um, and then give them some resources, but more importantly, then get out of their way. I think that is when their passion really comes through. And with the right tool, like the ones I mentioned, they could start up their own learning communities, right? They can pull in content both internally and externally. They can start up their own study sessions. I mean, we still have our traditional 70-20-10 learning methodology, but we're also investing in these tools that says, Christina, I think you could really work on your political savvy. Here's a couple other people working on the same thing, and you guys chase each other's passion and inspire each other to get there. That's when I've seen the most transformational learning happen, and that's what we're focused on here in the moving from a tool perspective, is things that can help us do that.
I think there's a lot to be said for cohort-based learning and learning with your peers as well, especially when you have similar goals too, and keeping each other accountable, having conversations around it. I think that's also really important, and also a point of meaningful connection as we continue to talk about this afternoon too. I want to ask, I'm sure you have many of these all of the time, but when was your last personal learning moment, whether it was big or small?
Yeah, I don't know if it was a personal learning moment. Uh, I, it was a revolution, I guess it was. It was this past summer, we were starting to loosen up a little bit from a COVID situation. This is prior to Delta, and I was at a graduation party talking to some friends of the family, and like so many conversations, everything turns to COVID at one point, and that led to the return to the office conversation. And companies are all over the board, and this friend of ours was being brought back into the office really rapidly, and he was kind of upset about it, didn't know how to feel about it. And it was less about being brought back into the office, but the reason, and the reason that they were given was that this company is a butt in seats type of culture. And that it took me really a long time to figure out, what does that mean? Like, I need you to be here in this chair for you to be successful. And to me, that was just so wildly crazy that a person has to physically look at another person to validate that they're doing the work that they should be doing.
Yeah.
It was at that point that I realized that the great opportunity is here. It's time for good companies like yours and mine to look for these great employees that are in these unfortunate situations and capitalize on that, right? Some companies don't deserve to have all-star performers. If you have an employee that you have to watch and you're a manager that can't be successful unless you physically see a person, you're destined for failure. So get out of the way and let us take your people. They're going to come work for us now, right? So
I
that was my aha moment.
I love that mentality. I think that you are right. I've also worked for organizations or just like had friends and colleagues work for organizations where they've said very similar things, where you need to be watching this person work and the productivity. And at the end of the day, that just doesn't working long term is not sustainable. So definitely here for the great opportunity as well. I know, Pat, I've been asking really kind of specific questions about your journey to this work and just, organizational strategies, but kind of an open-ended or vague question is, what's the next problem or situation you're currently trying to solve? Or another way of asking is, what's taking up the most brain space in Pat's mind right now?
Uh, um, there's about 100 things that take up a little bit. So it's hard to prioritize. But two things that I think about a lot, and our team thinks about a lot, is evolving our training and development organization into an organizational development organization, right? As volatility continues, as technology transformation continues, that has an impact on our people, right? They can't continue to do the same thing again and again because the environment is changing the role and the role is changing the needs. And if the person isn't meeting those needs, that's a problem, right? So how do we balance the needs of the individual with the needs of the organization, and ensure that both are aligned with our strategy? How do we decentralize learning? We just talked about that, right? How to decentralize learning, refresh the content, and deliver it in a manner that works for our hybrid environment, right? So that's huge. That'll take a while. The other thing that we think about, and we made some giant steps this last year, is presenting a compelling benefits package for all of our people, right? You know, you know, the hybrid work environment, the geographic disparity, the diversity that exists between every single one of us, the one size fits all benefit package, it just doesn't work anymore, right? And you don't just have an open bank account for that. So, what are the big ticket items that we need to be focused on? How do we prioritize and get the right package and really compel people to stay and to want to come to work for us? So that's another big one. So.
I mean, that's enough to take up the brain space, right? I think those are big projects, big questions. And I think in the long run as well, all of those things come out, especially in the last where you talked about kind of the not one size fits all approach for benefits makes a huge difference in people's lives, especially in a hybrid environment as well.
Totally. Yep, that's right.
Is there something that you would say for, people leaders, current and next generation people leaders need to have to incorporate in their strategy to be successful in the future?
Um, yeah, and I think we may have touched on a little bit, and it's a real easy thing to answer, but it's not an easy thing to do.
Sure.
But the answer is psychological safety. You've got to have it in the back. You got to know what it is, right? Especially for those that are outside of the HR space, it may be a new term. So Google Project Aristotle, and you'll get the whole story on psychological safety. But without psychological safety, people are not engaged, right? They're afraid to speak up, and therefore they're not going to give that extra effort. And if they're not going to give that extra effort and they're not going to speak up, you as their leader are going to make poor decisions. You're going to make short-sighted decisions, and ultimately you're going to have pockets of failure and you're going to be exposed. But
Mhm.
the beautiful thing is that the inverse is true, right? When people feel safe, they engage, they contribute, and ultimately you will listen and you will make better decisions. And for those of us that have worked for narcissistic bosses, you totally get it, right? You can't tell them anything.
Yeah.
And it's a terrible experience, right? So at the end of the day, again, I think a lot goes into psychological safety, and it's not easy to achieve, but I think if you get that right, you've got a team with you. You've got people with you on your side, and you could do some wonderful things.
Yeah, psychological safety is definitely something that is important to myself and to others on our team as well. And it's cultivated using the word that you used earlier, deliberately as well, creating those conditions as an organization for people to do their best work and again feel valued as as a person, as an employee, as a team member as well. And it's like a flywheel or a ripple effect too. When you have that psychological safety, you have more innovation, you have more feedback, you have better working teams and collaboration. So it is a net positive there.
Yeah, you nailed it. It is a ripple effect, isn't it? It just keeps going. So
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also sure that you have many of these similar to the learning moments and the parts of your job that you enjoy. But what is one of your proudest moments, either in this current role or just in the industry overall?
um, yeah, so I just want to do a quick nod. I would have to start with my family, especially my kids. What they've endured over the last couple of years. They've excelled in education, become leaders with their peers, and I think they've had a good time. But that's probably for a different podcast. So let me digress. But I want to give them a nod and just let them know how proud I am of them, and hope that they can be an inspiration to others. Um, I spent 14 years at Oppenheimer Funds, and it was a wonderful experience. If anyone has an opportunity to hire someone from Oppenheimer Funds, I highly recommend it. But our HR team was highly focused on preparing our people for the future of work by ensuring they understood our strategy, got the support that they needed, and were ready to pivot whichever direction the future would take them. If it sounds familiar, that's the same process we're using now at Chevron and Spectrum Federal Credit Union. But after we were doing this and working with our people, and we had a career coach, and we were spent a lot of time on corporate strategy, we were acquired by another company, and they closed down the entire technology and operations operation. 1,000 people, mostly in Colorado, were going to be displaced. And although that is a sad story, um, it has a happy ending and a silver lining. One of the things that we did to help our people was we facilitated an on-site job fair. Companies came from all over the place. Our competitors, people that knew nothing about us, they all showed up.
Mhm.
And the feedback that we got from those job fair participants is that they were amazed at the tenacity and the resilience of our people. Our people showed up proud and happy and professional. They were not sad, they were not bitter, and they were not angry. We trained them to be ready for the pivot. We didn't know what the pivot was, and we were certainly not expecting what we got, but they stood tall and they stood proud, and it showed up. And to me, um, when when we can invest in our people and see them do such spectacular things, it really makes me feel proud. And I'm glad that the team at Oppenheimer Funds and our CHRO, Andy Doyle, and others, invested in our people. So I think of that often, and I think of those people often.
Absolutely. That's a really great example. I think, the impact that you have on folks kind of manifests in years to come as well. And I think as a leader, that is a really great proudest moment to share with folks. Pat, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to share with people listening, or 1 to 2 key insights you want to kind of underscore around creating psychological safety,
Mhm.
or being kind of that impactful manager or leader?
Yeah, and this is a hard one because you've had so many smart speakers on your podcast. I've listened to
Included.
them, and yeah, I listened to those folks from Gusto the other day, and man, they are smart. So I don't know if I have a lot of new things to share, but I have one thing, especially for the non-HR people that might be listening, that are listening. Um, culture is a really fun conversation, and everyone, is essentially an expert on culture. But uh, here's the cool thing about culture: you don't have to do anything, and you'll have a culture, right? You don't even have to think about culture, and you'll have one. And that's both a cool and a super scary thing, right? If you want to just haphazard it and guess on what your culture should be, then you're going to have one. You're going to have a culture that's haphazard and not clear, and your people are going to be confused, right? But if you're deliberate, right, and you study your strategy and you understand your current state, future state gap analysis, if you listen to others,
Hmm.
right, if you come up with a direction that's most likely different than what you had imagined, then you're on the right path. Your culture will form, and shape and carry you and your organization forward. Again, if you hire people that are like you and people that you know and people that say yes to everything that you ask, then you're going the wrong direction. So challenge yourself. Hire people smarter than you, hire people different than you, right? Validate these assumptions and stop listening to the voice in your head and start listening to the people that are around you. That's when your culture really starts to take charge of the situation, and it increases the likelihood that your organization will be innovative and resilient.
Mhm.
Without it, it's just based upon your guess, and it's 50-50 at best, I would say.
Absolutely. I love that kind of call to action as well, because whether you are deliberately, implementing a strategy or not, your culture is happening. People are experiencing your workplace, and it's for better or for worse. So you should care about it and really cultivate that. Hire folks that are different from you, and it really powers innovation. It helps your product, service, or business. And it impacts people's lives as well. So Pat, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
It's my absolute pleasure. I hope a couple things land with people and they carry it forward. Be good to each other, all right?
Absolutely. And as a reminder for folks who are listening at AllVoices, we really believe in that employee feedback management as a requirement for the company to succeed overall. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.